Thank you. We've got quite a few questions from our members about police. So the next few questions are all about policing. So as a alderman, how do you go about listening to and weighing conflicting calls from some constituents who might want less of a conventional police presence versus some constituents who might want more of one?
That's a great question on both aspects of that. The first part is, you know, most decisions that are of substance in Evanston have people for and against. So that's an interesting challenge that I've faced countless times as I've navigated the past few terms. But I think a starting point for me in processing what people are looking for is to find the fundamental points where people agree. So if you take the people who want more police presence, and you take the people who want to completely defund the police, at the core of their goal and their desire is to make sure that people are living and existing in our space safely. They both have completely legitimate points as far as the threat that exists for them. So if you start with those fundamental points, then you can break it down and start to look at the obstructions to each person's goal. So you take the person who wants more police. Okay, what are the obstructions to that? I don't want a police car sitting on my block. We had an incident in my ward a little while back where something happened, and I had people who literally wanted to have cameras set up. I'm not okay with that, and I wouldn't support that, but I understand why they want that. So, then you involve the police, you involve the community, and you try to get to that core goal and find the solution that doesn't harm someone, something that's going to be specifically effective. People are legitimately concerned that there are those in the community who feel targeted by the police. Our Black residents, I mentioned the persistent segregation. That's still a problem here. It's still a problem everywhere. It's interesting how, as a country, people like to use the word woke. We're more woke than we were before. But one of the things I wonder is how could we not see before? I spent a part of my childhood in the South, and the textbooks and the information that we have had just given to us on a regular basis created narratives. So we have to look at these problems with those narratives that people have grown up with and experienced to correct them. Another example of that came into play when I forget who initiated it, but there was an idea to create safe zones around schools, right? Those words sound great. Yes, we want schools to be safe. We want it to be safe around schools. There was a further push to have cameras in those areas. But if you break that down and you look at the proposed solution that goes with those words, the proposed solution was a suspension of someone's civil rights. So you can do stop and frisk without cause, things of that nature. So breaking that down, I opposed that. And some people were upset, how can you be against safe schools? I'm not against safe schools. I'm against infringing on people's civil liberties. So that's kind of the thought process and how I approach this. You said you had a couple questions on policing. I could get a bit more into the specifics, but why don't we get into the questions, and then maybe you'll ask the question, and if I don't get a chance, I'll add back to that.
Sure.
Okay.
So you had mentioned in your answer, some of your constituents, Black and brown constituents, felt, were saying that they were over policed. What do you do to, assure them that either they're not being unfairly policed, or that, if you feel they are, that the police officers are being held accountable for that?
Well, I think one starting point is to acknowledge that they are. And again, kind of going back to that, cause and effect component of, what is the problem and what are we trying to solve? That's two-pronged. One is when the police show up and who they approach. The other part is what I'm going to call some personal accountability. When and why do we as a community call the police? And your first question alluded to this as well. There are people who feel like we need more of this. So is it that we need more, or is it that we need something that's different? So that's the first part. You have to acknowledge things, and then how are you going to change it? And that's the trickier part. We have a police department that I think is generally progressive and forward-thinking. They acknowledge that they're not perfect, but in my conversations and meetings with them, there has without exception, always been an intention and a willingness to cooperate in finding ways to do things better. When we were considering the body cameras, those were very expensive. So I had to look at that with a couple of lenses. You know, what are they going to accomplish? How much do they cost? You know, how are we going to pay for it? So I talked to a lot of people about that, people in the community, people in the command staff, and officers on the streets. The officers in the command staff, without exception, all told me, we absolutely want the body cameras. So I think that reflects an intention to have transparency as a goal. So if you have that intention, it's a lot easier to work with that group. You've got a culture that's amenable to that. I think our Citizens Review Commission is a good start. That's different than it used to be. I feel like we've been able to appoint people who are not the typical voices. I think with our boards and commissions, we tend to end up with a lot of the same people you see, like, you know, they'll be on one board and then they'll go to a different board, or somebody in the family's on the same board. I appreciate that the group that we have is broader and is, I think, going to have, you know, a broader age spread, a broader demographic. It's going to bring a much better perspective on the specific issue. They're very early in the process. I think maybe they had their first meeting in, like, I want to say June or July or something. And then of course, this is all probably over Zoom, I expect. So I think we have to give that a chance to see how it plays out. I've looked at packets, I've seen information, I've seen descriptions of things that have happened, and I've seen that the reprimands were given, things of that nature. So I can see that people seem to be taking this seriously, and you know, and I've talked to some people on the board before they started, and there was a clear intention to be independent. You know, that was one of the conversations I had with one of them. They did not want to feel like they owed anybody anything, they were beholden to anybody for anything. And I haven't talked to any of them about it since. So that's important. It's important for them to feel like they have the space. When I was on Zoning Board of Appeals, that's a lot different, but I had the same feeling. If I'm doing something and I'm making a recommendation or making a decision, I don't want a couple of aldermen sitting out there giving me, you know, an evil eye. I want to make sure that I feel comfortable. Now, whether they give me the evil eye or not, I'm still going to, you know, stick by my position. But there's no reason to make the people that are volunteering feel like they are, you know, in some way uncomfortable. I think another part that's important, and I use the word comfortable, members of the community need to feel like they are safe and, you know, free from any sort of retribution or retaliation if they make a report. And I guess that kind of remains to be seen, but I and others, I think, are paying close attention to that. If anyone ever feels that way, I would certainly want to know about it. But people shouldn't feel that way, whether it's about the policing issues or really anything else in the community. You should have the comfort level to approach someone and raise a problem or a concern if it exists.
Okay, thank you. So the next question I had, and you had started to talk about oversight a little bit. You started to get ahead of me here, but so FOIAs, especially those made of the police department, have become something of a contentious issue in City Council lately. I know you've had a lot of meetings about you know, whose responsibility that is. What do you believe the City Council can do to promote transparency and accountability when it comes to police FOIAs?
So FOIAs is a big question, particularly recently in the community. So I feel limited with your question, but I'll start by saying, personally, I don't think any one person should have complete control over any aspect of governance or policy. And, you know, I know that there are a number of people in the community who really feel strongly that an elected city clerk should be the sole person to do that. You know, regardless of the position, regardless of the elected position, I don't think you should ever have anyone operating without checks and balances. Despite the good intentions of the person, despite the good intentions of the body electing them, it's just not a good idea. You know, any one person needs input and feedback and checks and balances. So I feel like it's important to have those in place. With regard to the, like I said, the body cameras, we have consistent conversations over the policies and the procedures. You have to be thoughtful about, you know, who's a victim. So let's say something happens to someone, they're treated poorly. You have to balance, you know, a public right to know versus who the victim is. So generally, the person I like to look to first is if someone's mistreated by someone, let's say the police treated them improperly, the first person's interest should be the person who's harmed. So we should look to them first. We should make sure that they have all the information. They should have the body cameras. They should have everything that exists to enable them to understand what happened to them and to do with it what they want. So if they want to go to the press, if they want to have a press conference, whatever it is, that's great, because they were the person who was harmed. What I don't like to see is I don't like to see politicians say, I want this person's thing so I can go be a champion for somebody who may or may not want to be a champion, have them be a champion for them. In Evanston, we have an awful lot of the white savior kind of thing that also persists. And I think that we really have to be mindful of that. We have to be concerned with the people who are impacted and harmed, and really put those people in the first priority. But at the same time, you can't hide things. You can't conceal things. You should not improperly retain those. Having completely open information, I would not want, we had problems a few years ago with information that was posted on the next request system. We had rape victims, a lot of extremely personal information that really has no business being a Google search result. So, we took action to change that and make sure that the clerk's office was handling things differently. And that's important, because as a resident, whatever your harm, whatever your circumstances, people don't have a right to everything that you have experienced. So I think it's important to protect people's information. But if it comes down to the decision process or things that we're doing or the police are doing, that's something that should be readily available to them.
Okay. So one of the other issues that you had brought up in your earlier answer was on the police review board. So the current system, the new one that's in place, it's the mayoral appointed and approved by city council board. How do you feel that new system is working so far? Or there have been some calls to replace that with maybe one that's elected. Is that something that you would be in favor of?
So I think it's really too early to tell how well it's going to work. I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing so far. The calls from those who want to have an elected board, I think that's been around for quite some time. I've had conversations with a number of people involved with that. There are various iterations. There are some iterations where we would elect a bunch of people and give them a salary and things like that. I don't think that's a good plan. Based on the level of work that's required. I also don't want to see a situation where we're politicizing this type of thing. The idea here is to have independence and the ability to do the job without retribution. And I'm fearful that if there was, an election, what we've seen in the past couple of years is, for the worse, a lot of times the most money ends up carrying the day for an election. So we might like to think, okay, well, if we elect these people, it's going to be the people I know or the people I'm comfortable with. You don't have any guarantee of that. You might get somebody who is, complete other end of the spectrum, and they might, who knows, they could misrepresent during the campaign, whatever it might be. You could easily end up with people that are well-funded, heavily advertised, and in a position where they can do, maybe do harm, but certainly not do the independent, free from interference type of work that I think needs to be done for that.
Okay. And then the final question about policing concerns a specific incident that happened. And this is when the city of Evanston brought in the Northern Illinois Police Alarm System, or NIPAS, or NIPAS, however you pronounce that, to respond to the protests over at the university on Halloween. Do you believe the level of oversight the city has over NIPAS actions is sufficient? Or what would you do to make this relationship more transparent and accessible to Evanston residents?
So that was an interesting situation, right? We've got people that are saying two very different things. Along those lines, what I've done is I've met with and talked with some students who are there. I've met with some residents who live in the area. So I've tried to get a little bit better and clearer picture on, what happened. I also have a better sense of what individual people had personally experienced, also including the police. So it's apparent to me that Some of the people that were there protesting, you know, suffered some harm in different ways, and generally that's not what you want to see happen. The NEPA system, it's very important. We have something similar with the fire department, and we also have it with the police department. You never know what's going to happen. You know, early in the summer we had, you know, armed thugs with, I think, AK-47s and such attack the Best Buy. So you just don't know if something or when something like that could happen. So it's important to have that as a resource. On the other hand, if officers show up with badges covered, or, you know, their information concealed, I've heard conflicting reports on that, but I'll say this: that's never okay. That's never okay, period, if something like that happens. If an officer shows up or a group shows up and the conversational tone is something that's aggressive or inappropriate, or, you know, oh, we're here to, you know, do whatever, the command staff should be alert to that and should address that immediately before the group's deployed. I think it's important for our command staff and the people who are on in the field to, you know, to meet with and set the expectations and the tone before the individuals are deployed on whatever, you know, the specific mission is. I'm not 100% sure that we have what we want to have in place as far as that's concerned. I do know that the police chief and the others in the command staff are interested in making sure that we do. So I appreciate that. But I do think that we probably need some additional, you know, group training and some additional work with NEPAs. We are one community out of many. The police departments in different communities around us are different. There are different cultures. That's sadly, it's inevitable, but it's a fact of life. So, you know, there are circumstances where we're going to have to rely on somebody that might have a different culture, but it's critical to set that tone when the people arrive. And I think that in my experience, if you have the command staff and you have the other officers set the tone, set the expectations, they're not going to go against the people that we're working with. And if they are, then they need to be off the list.